Laurie, when I met you 10-ish years ago as part of a Seattle literacy group that you are founder of, authors that I got to be part of before I moved, I was struck immediately by how inclusive and welcoming you are. You know how you're a new person in an established group and you're always like, oh, no one's going to like me. And I remember you just were so welcoming to me. And it feels like that carries into your fiction. And that on some level, all of your novels, I don't mean to sound like precious, but they're about creating a better world.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
do you think that the core of who we are shows up in our writing, even if we try to hide it?
I don't know, but it certainly does for me.
Yeah.
And I don't and I don't try to hide it. And I also kind of feel like however, that isn't what I set out to do. And it comes back around that way.
Yeah, you set out to craft great stories.
Yeah.
I mean, I
And
was reading
yet,
the new book, 1, 2, 3, and the writer coach in me is like, oh my God, oh my God, that's so, I can't say what she does, y'all, because it'll give it away and you need to read the book. But I was like, oh, that was really clever. Oh my God, that's amazing. So you're truly fantastic at story.
thank you.
But this deeper thing comes through for me that feels very important.
I appreciate that. I first of all, I'm delighted to hear it, and also I appreciate it. I It's not that I don't read other things, and it's not that I necessarily set out to write these things, but I do kind of feel like in the end, I want stories that are hopeful and uplifting and leading with love. And I don't want them to be cheesy and I don't want them to be easy, but
Oh, that rhymed.
oh, dang it!
Laurie Frankel, and I don't do cheesy, and I'm not easy.
Both true. Um, it just kind of works out that way, I
Yeah.
think, in the telling of it.
Mm-hmm. You've written openly about two really private things in your life, about choosing to adopt a child when you could likely have had a biological baby, and you wrote about your son deciding to become a daughter. Or I guess that's one way to say it.
It's one way to say it. Yeah. At
Yeah.
the time, that seemed to be the case.
Yeah. They're both very personal essays.
Yeah.
And one went viral as Modern Love, for a Modern Love New York Times essay. Was it difficult to open yourself up like that? Because it's different than writing fiction, right? I mean, these are personal essays about you and your life.
Yes. Yes. Wildly different. And in fact, that itself is really remarkable thing that it was significantly easier to write a 350-page book than a 1,500 word essay. Is certainly saying something. And two, that my impulse to tell this story was to make it up, which is certainly in part my disposition as a human. Like, I'm very much a novelist by disposition, I think. But it is true that I find it very I have a tendency towards privacy, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to put stuff of it's hard enough to put your writing and your creative work out there because it feels like you've put your soul on a piece of paper and people won't like it and they'll be mean about it, and then how do you go on? If you add to that also like people's judgments about your parenting, then it becomes very difficult to like get out of bed in the morning. So it wasn't difficult to write, but it's very difficult to publish.
Why did you do it?
I mean, also such a good question. And there's an extent to which the answer is actually
I'm laughing. I'm laughing at your face, everybody. I'm not laughing at asking a question. I'm laughing at what your face is doing.
Yes, it's so often doing that actually. um, in some ways, the answer to that is really practical, which is that um, when when we were publishing the book, I was saying to my publisher, like, I it is extremely important that we protect my kids' privacy now and going forward, 5 years from now and 10 years from now and 15 and forever from now. so I can't have her on the internet in connection with me at all. And I'm not, in the way of promoting this book, gonna be talking about all of this private stuff. The book is fiction, and this isn't really anybody's business. And that's one thing, to share something of yourself, but it's a totally different ballgame when it's your kid. And the publisher said, okay, here's what we should do. What we're going to do is tell the part of the story that you are comfortable sharing, and put it out there in advance of the book coming out, so that we can point everybody to this 1,500 word essay and say, here's her story. This is what you can have in the way of that.
Oh,
and that way I was in control of it. First of all, it was very much, that essay is very much my story, not my kid's story. And that I was just in control of what I was going to share and the frame of sharing it.
And everybody,
really practical decision.
That we're talking about, This Is How It Always Is, Laurie's New York Times bestseller. And we'll also be talking about 1, 2, 3, her brand new book. Is it on the New York Times bestseller list yet?
Not yet, I don't think. It's only been out a week. So
okay. Well, I'll be celebrating with you when it is.
Thank you.
You say you have a disposition of a novelist, and you were getting a PhD in literature, in English literature and Shakespeare, I believe.
I was. So I dropped out of graduate school.
Yeah. So connect to me dropping out of graduate school and the disposition of a novelist.
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, it's a really fair question. One of the things so I was not getting an MFA. I was indeed in a PhD program for literature. And you would think that people who study books and study literature would be a lot of crossover with writing it. But in fact, those are so wildly different that that I felt like I had to choose. That there was not only was there no coursework, certainly I didn't take any writing classes. I haven't taken any writing classes. But also just like the notion that you might actually be a novelist was kind of looked down on, denigrated. It was as if it was beneath me or beneath us as scholars to actually be creating the things that we were studying. And that seemed like a disconnect that was sort of unfortunate. And the other, sort of difficult thing about academia is that there was all of this pressure to write, but nobody was ever going to read it. And it seemed like a real bummer to me to do all of this work to write something that no one was going to, that's the plan. It's not like a failure. No one is going to read this. Anybody reading this is not the point. And I was kind of like, well, it's my point. And so as I started to part ways with academia, this other way of engaging with novels, presented itself to me. It wasn't clear to me that I could write one, but it was clear to me I could try.
Was it hard to leave? Did you feel like?
It was hard to leave in that as in any community, all of the only message I was getting was that of course I had to stay, and that failure to do so was failure indeed. And so it was hard to, because all of my friends, my professors, my community was very insular at that point. And so that was very difficult. The other thing though, so I was teaching throughout while I was in graduate school. I was teaching, and I really, really liked the teaching, and I really wanted to be doing it with students who were engaged and interested. And so I realized that I didn't have to finish in order to be able to get a job at a community college, and that teaching at a community college was going to be a better fit for me than at a university anyway. And so I got a job, and having a job and therefore an alternative certainly made it easier to walk away.
That's one of the things I find fascinating about our paths in life. We just have no idea what's going to work. I mean, we have maybe an inkling, like there was something to do with literature.
Yes, right.
But you had the courage and the foresight to say this form of this calling isn't working.
Yeah.
And I think so many people lose their juice in life and fall into why bother, because they don't listen to that, because they're afraid of leaving their insular group. Will I be able to do it? But also there's the question in your case of, and this was always a big one for me, it's more prestigious. It's
That's
more
right.
prestigious. And so leaving prestige for what calls you
Yeah.
is
What calls
huge.
you, and which you may or may not be able to do,
Exactly.
and which may or may not be clear, is very difficult thing to do.
Especially in the creative world, because we're like, we want to be able to do it well. I mean, you're lucky. You're
Yes.
what I would call an idiot story savant.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love it.
They're few and far between. You just get story and how story works. And most people, that's what they struggle with in novels. They can get characters or setting or beautiful writing, but really that page turning, what's going to happen next and how it relates to the characters. I mean, in 1, 2, 3, you don't only do it with one character, you do it with 3 characters who all have significant issues, which I won't reveal, but they must have been really challenging to do that as a writer, because you really made yourself a Rubik cube.
Yes, it was not an easy book. Some books write easy and some books write hard, and this was very hard. It took a
Yeah.
really long time to do and just to sort it out. I mean, and for exactly that reason. And I mean, and indeed, I do think that I think about story in a very fundamental way. Like it orders my life and it orders my thinking, and it is at the forefront of all of the things. It's the thing that hangs over everything else. But it is also true that it's I work to put that together in a very like non-romantic technical kind of way, that is simply moving pieces around and editing until it fits and it works together, and thinking about like, okay, in order to pay this thing off here, I need to plant that 4 times. Where is it going and how am I doing it? So it is that savant like thing in some ways, and in other ways it's not at all. It's
Right. You're very
like
conscious
that
of
after
doing
the
it.
fact.
But you know what's interesting too, just to go back to the whole prestige thing, is some of the writers I work with think that's cheating.
How so? What do you mean?
Well, in other words, it's supposed to just all organically. Remember, it's like the John Gardner school. It's all
Yeah.
supposed to just come from the characters, and you're not supposed to. The author is not supposed to manipulate anything. And I'm like, that's not gonna. That just
It's probably
doesn't
not gonna work.
work.
Well, and I find it works for me. Eventually, the characters make their own decisions and do their own
Mhm.
things. Eventually, writing becomes like reading for me, where I type it and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I didn't see that coming. I'm so surprised. But not at the beginning. So it's a
Mm.
question of like developing the character and the story and the setting and the timeline and getting everything in place strong enough that then they are able to take
Oh, interesting.
over.
And then there's less of that. I have to make sure I pulled that in from 12 pages ago. And
Right. Or I see like, oh, I see where you were going. I didn't realize that. I need to go back and fix
okay,
everything
right,
that came before in order to make
right.
it go with this thing that I didn't realize was coming.
Okay. I love that. That totally makes sense to me. I want to go back to this idea though that you never studied writing.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything to be sheepish about. She's doing a sheepish face.
I was doing a sheepish face. I think that that's true. In fact, what I did do was study text a lot. I read a lot, a lot, a lot, and that I think is the best preparation for writing. Is reading everything you can widely and thinking about it critically and being surrounded by other people who are willing to think about it critically. And so the fact that they were doing it from a reading perspective and I was unbeknownst to me learning how to write mattered less than the fact that we're going to say like, okay, for 60 hours a week here, what I'm going to do is read books and talk about them, look at story, look at language and how it's working. And that is really, really good training, even though I never took a writing class.
Do you still read that way now?
Yeah, I do.
So can you take us in a little closer to that? What does that look like? Does it mean that you're making notes while you're reading in the book, that you're slowing down? Yeah, you're nodding.
Yeah,
So
all of those, yes, all of those things. So one is that I'm reading constantly. The time I spend between books is the time it takes me to put the one down and pick up the next one. I'm reading always. And yes, I take notes in the margins. I I underline and all of those and make lots of notes, margins it on the end pages and such, little notes to
Mhm.
myself. But also after I finish a book, and without fail, I write a little essay to myself basically that says, okay, here's what worked about this novel and why, and here's what didn't work and why it didn't, and here's how that applies to me and what I'm doing in my life, really, really specifically. And then I'll make a list at the end, and it'll be things like avoid overly long chapters, like very, very specific, really nitty gritty. Which I think is sort of back to your question about this notion of like, is it organic or not? And the answer is no, it's really not. And so, very much saying like, rather than saying like, oh my God, I loved this book, looking at it a little bit more closely and saying, okay, like why? Well, I couldn't put it down. Why? Well, because the chapters were all bite-sized and they broke at this kind of a moment. Okay, now that's really, really practical. That's something that's really concrete, and that I'm not going to apply it exactly to my book because my book is different, but the principles will certainly apply. And I do that as a practice, and I do it without fail.
That's fantastic. And do you find that you learn more from books that fail than books that are good? Because I do.
Yeah.
Because I can see it better. And when the books are really masterful, I'm like, I don't know what they did.
Exactly. When the books are really good, my notes to myself are like, step one, be brilliant. It's not like useful to me. Whereas when they don't work quite, it is much easier to see why they didn't, and also what is very easy to say from the bleachers, but for me to look at it and say, okay, if only they had done this, it would have worked. And that's really useful to me, not because I'm going to go back and revise these people's published novel, because of course I am not, but, and
good, that would be a
would
weird
anyone
hobby.
want me to. but applying those lessons, to myself, to my own writing, is really good to be able to, like strip back the outside so you can see the gears and how it works and how it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. When you were conceiving of 1, 2, 3, I know people wanted a sequel to This Is How It Always Is, and it was a huge breakout book for you. It was your most successful novel.
Yes.
And your first time on the big list.
Yes.
And and was it hard to say I'm not going to write a sequel, or were you like so clear there's no story left there, I'm done with that?
I was not clear, and the more people ask, the more I think, well, maybe.
Give them what they want.
Well, I mean, it's. I'm very touched that people have responded so warmly and well to that book. I'm incredibly grateful for that.
Every time someone would tell me they read it, our book club read it, I'd be like, I know her. I was proud, like alongside of you, like I know her. Yes, that's a great book. She's a really nice person too.
Yeah, I mean, it's, of course you want to give people more of that if that's what they want. I was, however, very keen for like thematic reasons to end that book without answering the question. I very much did not want to say like, and then he went back to being a boy forever, or
right.
And then she knew she would be a girl forever. I wanted to end that book in the middle, and so the reason why it feels like you want a sequel is like that's exactly what I wanted you to feel at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So
because it's part of the question of gender.
Yeah, right.
It's one of the, when you're experiencing gender in different ways, that's part of the question. For some people, that's part of the question. That's what was so brilliant about the book is you really, I mean, you gave it to us from the parents' point of view. And as you wrote, do we love our children best by protecting them at all costs or by supporting them unconditionally? Does love mean saying nothing, not even your happiness, is important as your safety? Or does love mean saying be who you are and I would love that person no matter what? So you wrote it from that point of view, but you also allowed us to experience the question of gender.
Yeah. I mean, and indeed, I think it is a question of gender, and I think it is the way a lot of people experience gender, and I also think it is the experience of being human. Basically, it is. I mean, it's what you were talking about before about being willing to give up this thing that isn't quite working for this other thing that you don't even know if it exists.
Oh my God, you're right.
That's that's why the book feels like it didn't end, because that's what life feels like all the time. You have to make decisions with not enough information. If it were clear what choice A and choice B were, then probably you would be able to make a choice. But that's never how it works. You'd always, I mean, that's what the title means too. This is how it always is. You always have to leap with incomplete information.
And no idea if you'll land and break both your ankles.
That's what it is like.
Yeah. Oh, that's so brilliant. One of the things I love about This Is How It Always Is and 1, 2, 3 is that they almost feel like, I don't know what the right analogy is, but they almost feel like puzzle boxes.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
I used to have a puzzle box from Disney World when I was little, and you'd have to like do these things to get into the secret compartments. And 1, 2, 3 especially feels like that, because I was so wondering what you are setting us up. Yeah. What are you going to do? And in some ways you're setting us up for the same sort of, but very different, but similar theme of these unanswerable, difficult situations and questions in life.
Yes. With 1, 2, 3 going into it, it seemed to me to be a really difficult needle to thread, I suppose, because on the one hand, I want you to end this book feeling empowered. I want the moral of the story to be like, well, this thing that you think cannot be done, maybe cannot be done the way you've been doing it. So then you got to think about how else it can be done, the ways that you haven't been told, the ways that have not been offered you, the ways that are not going to be easy, the ways that you're not going to think of right away. Where else might you look? How else might you go about this? And that happens at the individual level. And then, of course, it's a novel, so it's character driven. So there's all that on the one hand, but on the other hand, I have been worried of late about all of the language of empowerment lets off the hook people upstream who both are responsible for, in this case, extraordinary malfeasance and abuse, and also the ones who have the actual real power to make a difference. And so sometimes I have been feeling very concerned about, these like, can I say shit on this podcast?
No, you shitting can. Okay. That didn't really work as a joke, but yes, you can.
The shit that comes downstream that
literally,
yes, literally, that is not our fault, and that is not in our power, no matter how good we feel about ourselves and how strong we want to be. But there are to prevent that these are systemic baked in problems, and the people who should address that do exist, but they aren't me. And so the book is really trying to figure out a balance between those things, and it is in some ways an impossibility.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why for so many years I didn't write another self-help book, because was so deeply angry at what the personal growth, coaching, personal empowerment world does. It doesn't put it in a political or larger context. And when I ended up writing Why Bother after all that, I really struggled with how do you walk that line between seeing the context, but you can't give up? Because if you, and that's what the girls in the book, they don't give up.
Right.
And it's really difficult. I mean, it's easier from a place of white privilege.
Yeah.
By far, and enough money in the bank
Yeah.
to pay, than what your characters are dealing with.
Correct.
And I know if I was one of those girls or their mother, I probably would give up. I would have done what the rest of the town did. Again, not to spoil the story, but
yeah,
right. I would have been like, I can't do it anymore.
Yeah, indeed. And that would have also been a really, really legitimate thing. And two, frankly, would be, you fighting and feeling like, okay, I'm still standing, so I win, when in fact, no, you are not winning. There's so much that is stacked against us, and that is really, really important to talk about. So indeed, that is a very difficult line to tread.
It is, and one that the powers that be don't want us to, they want us to think it's all in our control.
Right. Yes, exactly.
And that therefore it's our fault.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And it's not in our control, and it's not our fault. And there are people whose fault it is, and in whose control it is, and who are often, and who are often going to great lengths to make you believe otherwise. And so that is the line that I think we all must walk, frankly.
So it's again, one of the things I love about 1, 2, 3, which I loved. I kept saying to Bob as I was reading, oh my God, wait till you read this. Wait till you read this. Oh my God, this is so good. Oh my God. You know that feeling when you're reading a great book at night and you just can't wait to get to bed.
Yes.
Our neighbors, we live in a wonderful neighborhood with all these wonderful neighbors. And they're always like, you guys go to bed so early. I'm like, but I'm reading.
Yes. Thank you. I appreciate it so much.
And I just happen to read in my bed where you can't see me.
Well, indeed, me too. And it is the best place to read. But the problem is, at least my problem is, then I stay up all night reading a book.
Do you? See, I don't. I fall asleep. I usually fall asleep about 9:30. Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
I'm older than you are. Can we talk a little bit about money and making money as a novelist? Was it a huge game changer for This Is How It Always Is to become such a breakout? Or had you structured your life in such a way that you could keep writing no matter what?
Yeah, yes and no. I think that, as is always, I'm sure, the case, there are lots of things that go into that calculus. So I was teaching full time when I wrote all of my first and most of my second novel, and had been doing so for 15 years or so. And therefore, I wasn't trying to eat off of the novel writing. I had a career and money saved, and that's good because there's already so much pressure. You don't want to put eating on top of.
I'm trying to. I'm going to see all your novel covers with fork and knife on top of them.
Exactly. It is also true that I am married to a software engineer.
That's great.
Which is great. Yeah. It's great because he is great, but it also is great because, it is both financially stable and predictable. Whereas novel writing is not predictable. It might go well and it might not. And even if it does, I only get paid twice a year at most on good years. So that's difficult to budget for. To plan for in that way. It is also true that there are lots of things that go into the initial contract and how that works, that have some to do with how the previous book did, certainly, but also there are other things that are in that mix there. And the arc of time is a little bit funky, which is to say that This Is How It Always Is was out for a while before it started.
Right. I remember watching all that and being so excited for you.
It was so exciting. It was really wonderful. but it did mean that therefore the next book was sort of in progress. And I mean, writing it was very much in progress, but selling it also was quite a bit underway, I suppose, by the time. So, so it's not that it's not linked, but it is nothing like a direct correlation either.
What's it like now? You're not teaching anymore, right?
I'm not. And I mean, so that's like the first thing. I'm really, really lucky to be financially and otherwise to be able to do this full time. Not enough can be said about elevating your hobby to your day job. And, and it takes so much time and brain space to do this. And so I liked teaching and writing at the same time. That worked for me, but it's very different than being able to say, like, this is my job. This is my job. I treat it like my job. I'm very serious about it. I do not screw around. I'm very diligent.
What does that look like?
Perhaps. Well, I mean, this is such a good question and a really difficult one to answer at the moment because my kid hasn't been to school in a year and a half.
Right, pandemic. Oh, how quickly I forgot, as if life has been normal for the last year and a half.
Yeah, exactly. So I used to write whenever she was at school. And without question, if she was out of the house, I would sit my ass down and work because that time was very limited and precious. School isn't even almost 40 hours a week.
I know. I remember that. I remember being so angry about that.
Like, why is it a half day again? Why?
Exactly. And what is this holiday thing? Why is this a holiday? Why do you need us in-service day?
Yes, indeed. And that was a habit I got into when she was when she's a baby, and I was paying for babysitting, and at $25 an hour, I was going to sit down and use that time. And it was at that point, it was like 90 minutes or something like that, because it was babysitting. It wasn't even really like daycare or preschool or anything like that. So that used to be what I did. I did not imagine that I was really going to get anything done on the weekend. I did not imagine I was really going to get anything done in the afternoons, but I was really, really diligent for those 6 hours or so between the bus coming and the bus coming back again. Now she's not been to school since March of 2020, in a year, like 16 months, 18 months, whatever that is. And that definitely put a dent in my productivity level. She's not super little anymore, though, and so it's a different kind of thing. Also, remote school required a lot of help, a lot of emotional support, a lot of tech support, just a lot of interventions. So at this point, I've been writing in like 15-minute bursts, but in the night, in the morning, on the weekend, on the holiday, in the bathroom, in the car. It's very much a catch as catch can. And again, I am lucky that I'm a writer who can do that. Both from a craft perspective and also like physically. I don't necessarily need to be sitting at a desk in my super ergonomic chair. I do not necessarily, like I'm not a writer who needs 3 hours or it's not even worth it. I needed to be quiet. And so I bought a pair of gun muffs. Because I can't even listen to music. Like noise canceling headphones were not going to do it for me. I just silent. But other than that, I bought gun muffs and sat in the bathroom or stood at the sink level, which is like the perfect standing desk. Wrote my book.
Are you working on something new already?
Yeah, always. Yeah.
Always.
I mean, as you know, production is long. So they wrest this thing out of my hands at some point, and then it's a year and a half before it comes out. I would lose my mind if I weren't
working on
during
something
that time.
Can you give us some idea what you're working on?
I mean, I would if I knew.
But tell us about that process. Like, tell us about the finding the story.
Yeah, I am one of those people who I don't know what it is until I get there. I cannot outline. I'm very much, it's not even that I'm a proponent of shitty rough drafts. It's just that that is the only thing I can do.
Mhm.
It's really terrible. And then I revise it and revise it and revise it and revise it dozens, hundreds of times
Mhm.
until it takes shape and gets good, and find it along the way. And and sometimes that happens fairly quickly, and not this time.
Does
So
that scare you when it doesn't
yes,
happen? Yeah.
yes, absolutely. And I mean, novels are long, so the I feel like if I were writing, I don't know, like poems, and I wrote one every day, or I were writing essays and I could write one every week or so, but then I would learn something that I could apply going forward. But novels are, they're very long, so I what I and they're very different from, at least mine are very, very different from one
Different
another.
from each other. They are. They're very
They
different,
are.
except for these themes and the sort
Yes.
of, these deeper, these big life questions that you take on in different ways.
Yeah.
So there is I would say there's a similar feeling, again, to go to that opening question that I asked you, of
Yeah.
coming into a better world, or being
Yeah.
asked to think about a better world.
Yeah. And these two in particular, I feel, are companion novels. At
Mm-hmm.
least in my heart, they are.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, just from a craft perspective, all the things that I fought really hard to learn the previous book probably are not things that are going to help me in the next one. Um, because it's just a different project. It comes together differently, and and I've become a different person, because I mean, this book took 3.5 years. I've become a completely different person. Um, in that time when I was writing This Is How It Always Is, Obama was president. We assumed that Hillary was going to be next, and in between then and 1, 2, 3, we had Trump and a global pandemic. I mean, I became a different person.
Mm-hmm. And we've lost our innocence even more,
Yeah.
which I didn't think was possible. But
Yeah, it's been a tough year.
will you look for books to read, like a writer, to help you with the problems that you're facing with this new book? Will you go looking for help? Will you try to, how do you find that? Do you go look in the bookstore now that you can go back to the bookstore?
Yeah.
Go back to Elliott Bay?
Yeah.
Will you, third place, will you try to remember things that you've read and reread them, or both?
Both.
Yeah.
Both, absolutely, yeah. And just reading about new books that are coming out,
Oh,
and
sure.
paying attention, ear to the ground kind of thing. But yeah, I go to Elliott Bay and I talk to the booksellers. I go to the library. Librarians are magic in this way. I and I read so much that that if some everything helps me somehow. And
Mm-hmm.
one particular book that I thought was going to help me in some particular way did not. Well, okay, good. Then I'll just read the next one and maybe that
Right.
will.
Right.
And I certainly because 1, 2, 3 is narrated in the first person present tense by three different narrators in turns, and I had never done that before, and that was easy enough to seek out.
Sure. Barbara
And
Kingsolver.
yes, in fact,
Yeah.
was exactly where I
Yeah.
started. Poisonwood Bible was my
Poison Bible. Yeah.
first one. And but lots of people are doing, like, it was easy enough to, and it doesn't have to be an exact match. In fact, you probably don't want it to be, but certainly to say, like, okay, how else do people use the first person? How else do people use the present tense?
How else do people change POVs?
How else do people change POVs, which is very hard.
It is very
And
hard.
and just like really from a very nuts and bolts perspective, reading for that and seeing what happens. And then, sometimes you're thinking, like, okay, I have had enough a structure. I need to think about theme. So, like, this is a book about sisters. I shall read other books about sisters.
I shall read other books about
Yes.
sisters. Did having more success with this is how it always is. I always want to change the title of that book.
It's a hard title.
It's a hard title. It's a hard title for me. Did it make it harder to write 1, 2, 3, or were you already deep enough into it that you were like, oh, okay, this is interesting?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I do know that writing 1, 2, 3 was really hard. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if that was some kind of block I was having because of the previous book. Um, I think it was just structurally
It's a really difficult
really
book.
difficult book.
Not to read. It's a pleasure and joy to read.
Yeah,
It's a page turner.
Eventually it was. It was not at the beginning. And, and it was just a lot to kind of sort out and figure out. And for reasons I do not entirely understand, sometimes everything falls into place quickly and easily, and sometimes it does not. This one I think was probably predictable because the structure is such that I could not cut a chapter without cutting 3 chapters, or
Mm-hmm.
add a chapter without adding 3 chapters, and they had each of them to tell their individual stories plus combine to tell the overarching story.
Right. And the overlapping perspective that you would go for. I think you only went forward in time, right? You didn't go back.
Oh, yes, that is
to show it through.
Yeah.
Which is another incredibly wonderful technique that's confusing. I ask you if you're scared about this book, which makes me want to ask you, how do you deal with those critical voices?
I mean, I can tell you what I wish I did, what I hope.
Okay.
I mean, here's what I think. I think some days are better than others. I really, really enjoy all of the aspects of the writing process. So those critical voices are shouted down, I think, by my enjoyment of the process and my knowledge that the fact that this thing that I have written today, these 1,000 words that I cranked out today, are terrible is fine, because that's just part of my process. I'm going to write it really badly and then I'm going to fix it later. And
that's experience
later. And so that, yes, that's experience. That is something I have learned along the way. And I enjoy writing a shitty draft, and then I enjoy making it better. I like all of those things. There's definitely some panic where I think, like, this isn't going to come together this time. But emotionally, I find that easier to weather than publication. I think that publishing is, that is drafting and revising and editing and all of those things, which takes years and years and is very hard work, I find to be infinitely easier than putting it out there in the world, which is very hard, and which is a roller coaster. It is, and there are very high highs and very low lows, and sometimes in the same 15 minutes.
Right, and especially with this is how it always is. This is how it always is, because you got so much hate mail, and hate mail from people who never read the book.
Right, exclusively, in fact, from people who never read the book, best I can tell. Yeah. And very personal hate mail, and I don't know what to do about that. I mean, it does strike me. So this new book has been out for about a week now, so I'm very much thinking about this, right at the moment. It is just a very different skill, writing a book versus publishing a book.
That's so true.
What you have to do to be able to write the book is, like, sit in a room by yourself with people you made up for 3 years, and if you don't have to, like, visit people or talk to people online, so much the better, because you're going to be focused on doing what you're doing. But then you have to go like the opposite of that in every way.
You have to talk to
go
me.
out into the world. You're easy. And the other thing that I think is interesting is that books are, on the one hand, I mean, it is something that I'm selling. This is my job. It is what I do for a living. It is a product that I am hoping people will go to a store and buy. And, and it is also a distillation of my soul on a piece of paper. And
Hmm.
those two things are really not always or even usually in concert with one another.
Yeah, it is part of that. I forgot which episode we talked about that. I'll remember. I'll look it up, y'all, and put it in the aside. But yeah, how do we make peace with that? How do we find, the not make peace with it, but kind of like to go back to the theme of the last two books. How do we live with that big question of being an artist in a commercial world, in a capitalist world, yeah, without killing ourselves, without killing our hearts and quitting.
Right. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is certainly more tempting, I think, during the part that seems like the good part. That is, like, I think that often people think like, oh, it must be so fun to go on book tour and have your book in the bookstores and all of this stuff, and it is. But I am definitely, it is harder for me to make my way through that than the just showing up at your desk every day.
Every day.
Every day.
So I am so delighted we got to talk about all of this. It's so rich. It's so wonderful to see you. And I always like to ask this last question. What do you want to learn next?
Oh, Jen, that's such a good question about about um, about writing, about creating, about life. Who can say? um,
It's kind of a
I
Laurie Frankel question.
it is. It is, and I am always so much more interested in posing questions really than answering them. Not for you, but like for the reader. What I am going to learn. Well, I mean, first of all, I I'm I am always, in fact, one of the things is that I think that's what novels are about. Novels are about what people learn and how they grow and change over the course of the thing. That's what I think narrative is about. Um, so, like, broadly and generally, I hope my answer to your question is everything and often and continuously. I hope I'm always learning things, and I am certainly always going down rabbit holes. Um, that is, I will sit and read the newspaper in the morning and think, huh, and then spend and go and research that stuff and see where it takes me and keep reading about it and all of those things. More specifically, though, gosh, I think we have all of us been through quite a time, and that it is time to be asking really important questions about, I mean, these things that we're talking about, how you take on systems, how you fight your own good fight and you feel empowered and you're doing your good work, but not in isolation. How you involve your community, how you um, think about that in respect to the large systems upstream that are not working in our favor. I think we're having a reckoning on any number of fronts, and it's time. So I am hoping to learn really concrete ways to start making the world better, I hope.
It's beautiful.
I mean, it is, but it's large. It's really
It's
big.
large. I know. I've been a climate activist, for want of a better word, since I was little, and it's overwhelming and hard. And whether it's race or voting rights or you know I mean, this in the case of 123, the environment. But I think story is one way that we're going to do it.
I do too. I think story is one way that we're going to do it, and it's certainly the thing that is at my disposal most readily. Um, which is to say, I am not a lawyer. I am not a politician. Uh, I'm not super great at public speaking. It's certainly I am lucky to have this place to speak because it is the best place for me to do so. And it certainly is what works for me. Story is where I learn everything, and um, and where I see my way through the things that cannot be seen through. So I hope that I hope that that is true for other people, and I am very blessed to be able to contribute to that in a little small way.
Thank you for spending time with us.
You are such a good interviewer. You're very, very good at this. I'm not
Thank you.
surprised. You're very, very good at this.
I appreciate that.